Going to begin the webinar. Thank you so much for attending today. Um, my name my name is Jill Zippin. I am the chairwoman of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania. We are the only Jewish Democratic PAC in the state of Pennsylvania, and we are so glad that you're here tonight. Our organization works to elect Democrats that reflect both Democratic and Jewish values. We would love for you to join our work over these critical next 8 months. So please go to djop.org and learn how you can get involved. I'm going to introduce our three wonderful speakers, and then they're each going to give an opening remark, and then we'll get into the Q&A. We have with us tonight Tammy Fox Isikoff, a former trial attorney for the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service and Special Assistant United States Attorney. She has served as immigration legal consultant to NBC, ABC, CBS, CNBC, Fox, and MSNBC. Ron Klasko is the founding partner and chairman of Klasko Immigration Law Partners, LLP, one of the largest and most well-respected immigration law firms in the U.S. He's a former national president and three-term general counsel for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. He is the only lawyer honored twice by the American Immigration Lawyers Association for his contributions to immigration law. Rebecca Kersner is the Associate Vice President for Strategic Communications and Media at Highest, where she designs approaches to disseminate information, expertise, and advocacy in support of the rights of forcibly displaced people around the world. I'm going to begin by asking all three of you to give an opening remark to this question. The question is, why is immigration both a Jewish and American value? And why don't we begin with you, Tammy? Please talk about why it is both a American and Jewish value. Then we'll move to Ron and then to Rebecca.
Okay. Today we are witnessing something that most of us have not seen in our lifetimes, and that's the abrogation of due process, especially in the immigration realm. While we all desire to have our laws respected and our borders secure, we cannot help but feel disillusioned by the dehumanizing treatment of foreign nationals that we are now witnessing. We as Jews with Jewish values must speak up. And we'll get into a little bit more into what is happening. But, I always grew up learning that there's always room for the stranger at your dinner table. That we as a Jewish people, we even treat animals with kindness and respect. The way we kill a cow, the kosher mentality that we don't allow an animal to suffer. We're now allowing human beings to be treated worse than we would ever allow an animal to be treated. We would never house animals in conditions that we are housing these humans in. And what starts with other minorities has historically always ended with the persecution of Jews. So not only does this treatment of foreign nationals violate our American values and due process, it also violates our Jewish values of welcoming the strangers, treating people with humanity. And we need to be concerned about what comes next. If this is the way that we're allowing minorities to be treated, we are a minority, maybe more of a minority than the Hispanic minority. And we really need to speak up because historically, this does not bode well for us as Jews.
Thank you. Ron, if you could add to that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Well, I think I can share my story briefly. So I've been an immigration lawyer for over 40 years. I've devoted my career to helping immigrants. I believe very strongly in the four words, a nation of immigrants, and I believe very strongly that immigration is the foundation upon which our country has been built. I've proudly helped thousands of people immigrate to the U.S., reuniting families, helping refugees, helping entrepreneurs start businesses in the US, helping people start new lives in the US. That's very much what makes America strong. At the same time, during those same 40 years, I have worked with many different Jewish organizations, and I'm real proud of work I've done with them that I think is very consistent with the work I've done with immigrants. I've worked with Jewish Community Relations Council, HIAS. I've worked on deporting Nazi war criminals. Most recently, I'm working with Tammy on something called Exodus Migration, helping people fleeing the US anti-Semitism to find homes elsewhere. And what I've learned and taught in my experience working with Jewish organizations is that there are several reasons why immigration is really, very much a Jewish value. And a lot of this is what Tammy already said so well. But our Jewish values are what Tammy said, human dignity. We welcome the stranger. Love your neighbor as yourself. We believe in family, in the importance of family, and we're seeing families stripped apart. We believe in kindness and mercy. All of what I was taught were Jewish values we are seeing taken away from large groups of people in ways we've never seen before. Even if we weren't so concerned about how this impacts our Jewish values, as Tammy so well stated, there's selfish reasons. I'm a Jew, I'm a minority. If it's okay for this country to treat minorities poorly, then it's okay for them to treat me poorly. We've seen in our Jewish history so many times where we're not always the first, but we end up being the last. Even in the Holocaust, we weren't the first, but it got to us. We need to be concerned about that. I've had the pleasure of working with HIAS for many years. HIAS has done a wonderful job bringing refugees to the US. That's largely impossible now. All right? We for the first time in our history, we do not welcome refugees to the United States. And the last thing I'll mention just briefly is that we're all concerned with anti-Semitism. Well, there's a very, very thin line between anti-immigrant and anti-Semitism. If you put together the people who are anti-immigrant, so many of them are anti-immigrant because the immigrants are not white, they're not Christian. We want the good old days when this was a white Christian country, and that doesn't necessarily include Jews. So those are some of my thoughts on
Thank,
how to answer your question, Jill.
thank you, Ron. And Rebecca, if you could add a bit to that, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I can answer this question almost by introducing myself. I'm Rebecca Doreen Rivka Devora, named after two immigrants. My great-grandmother, Rebecca, who fled the pogroms in Russia and arrived in Ellis Island in the early 1920s, where she and her siblings had to start a new life in a new country all on their own. And then there's my great-grandmother, Devora, who fled the pogroms in Russia, but it was in the late 1920s. And if you know your Jewish immigration history, the quota system was in place by then, and she was unable to get into the US and instead ended up in Cuba, where her family would live for the next 21 years. Two people who would have had the same story, except for a discriminatory policy that excluded people based on their nationality. It won't come as a surprise to anyone on this call because our community knows what it means for a community to be targeted based on who they are and for doors to close on people seeking safety. And our community also knows what it looks like to be welcomed. We've experienced both as a people. And so it's also a real honor to be here representing HIAS. I've worked at HIAS for 11 years, and I'm so proud of the historic work of HIAS helping Jewish Americans reach safety starting in the 1880s, whether it was what my great-grandmothers experienced or genocide in Europe or persecution in Iran, Cuba, Morocco, the former Soviet Union. And we estimate that whether they know it or not, the families of more than half of all American Jews were helped at some point by HIAS. But prouder still am I of our current work, which is based in the Jewish value of welcoming the stranger, helping refugees and immigrants from all around the world, regardless of their religion, their nationality, their race, their background. And what we like to say is that once we helped refugees because they were Jewish, and now we help them because we are Jewish. So 1 year into the Trump administration, a little bit more than 1 year, as Tammy and Ron are laying out, the United States has deliberately dismantled refugee protection, asylum, and humanitarian systems, and is targeting immigrant communities, causing extraordinary harm to people fleeing danger all around the world. Every one of our clients, every one was dramatically affected by the Trump administration's attacks. Families have been left stranded, communities destabilized, lives at risk, both here in the US and around the world. And so we're fighting back. For example, we're currently involved in 7 legal challenges to the Trump administration's agenda, 5 of which were filed in the past month alone. But I wanted to say that with all the destruction happening, recently I went to the Statue of Liberty because honestly, after everything that we're seeing, I wanted to see if the statue was still standing. That, like, honest to God, that's why I went to to Statue of Liberty to see if they hadn't managed to tear that down too. And I read the words on the base, right? Give me your tired, your poor. And I was reminded that, those were written by Emma Lazarus. Um, and when she wrote those words, she wasn't writing them as a reflection of the policies that were in existence at the time of the writing. She was writing them as a protest of the anti-immigrant sentiment of her era. That was a protest. That was not a reflection of, the policies that were in place. She was a highest volunteer, and she was, writing and doing what she could to stand for Jewish values, the understanding that each person is holy and each person is created in the image of God, just like the 1,100 rabbis and cantors who released a statement today in support of refugees, just like the hundreds of synagogues who are going to participate in Refugee Shabbat this weekend, and the thousands of Jewish volunteers who are taking action in Minnesota and elsewhere to protect their immigrant neighbors. So it's a real honor to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. And I do think that this is very central to who we are. And I appreciate this opening question.
Thank you.
Jill, it's important to mention here that this administration is not just attacking those who are deemed undocumented or unlawfully here. They're also attacking those who are lawfully here and the mechanisms by which people lawfully immigrate.
Which goes to my next question. Or my first question, I should say, is that when we talk about this, the Trump administration uses the word immigrant or, illegal alien or worse. But the immigrants fall into a bunch of different categories. And I think it's important that everyone on this Zoom who's listening understand the difference between a refugee, an asylee, temporary protected status, green card holder, dreamer, visa holder, and undocumented immigrant. It would be really useful to have these words defined, and after you define them, can you talk about why this administration tends to lump them together? Tammy, you can go since you had already started.
Okay. I mean, it could take 8 hours, to be honest with you, to go through all those definitions. So let me just briefly explain what is going on. Okay. This is attack on all foreign born. It's not an attack just on refugees. It's not an attack on those who are deemed overstays or illegals. It's an attack on all foreign born. So I'm going to kind of parse this out. What is happening? The enforcers of immigration, the immigration judges, by the way, are now called like the Department of War, Department of Defense. Now they're called deportation judges. They're no longer immigration judges. And every good immigration judge, every good and decent immigration judge who had autonomous thinking or too high a rate of approval has been terminated. They often terminate them by sending them an email while they're on the bench, rendering a decision that they do not like, and they get escorted out of the building. So if that's not a chill toward granting anybody relief, I don't know what is. Everybody has families to take care of, and they do not want to be terminated. Though Trump said that he would go after the most serious criminals, who has he gone after? And this all maybe parse this out. He's gone after parents of U.S. citizens, spouses of U.S. citizens, veterans, people who served in our army. He's gone after people who came here lawfully and applied for asylum. If they have an asylum pending, they're considered asylum applicants. If the asylum is granted, they're considered asylees. He's gone after temporary protected status. What is temporary protected status? By the way, we call it TPS for short. TPS is granted by an administration, because they have deemed it unsafe to return these people to their home country. So, for example, he terminated temporary protected status for Haitians, for Syrians, for people from Yemen, for people from Venezuela. These are just an example. For people from Liberia. These are all countries where you really cannot return to safely. But nevertheless, he terminated TPS status without giving any warning. So these people who had homes rented, cars rented, held jobs, suddenly saw their status all disappear in a day, and with no place to go to. Then there's those granted withholding of removal, and Rebecca can shed more light on that. But for example, in order to get asylum or be eligible for asylum, one must apply within 1 year of arrival in the US. Sometimes people miss the 1 year deadline, but they nevertheless can prove that they would be persecuted if returned to their homeland. They get withholding of removal. That means their removal cannot be initiated to their country where they sought asylum from. However, they can be removed to any third country. So what country is he removing these people to? El Salvador, Mexico, Angola. I mean, places that are war torn, that will be willing to, for money, take these people who have already demonstrated a well-founded fear of persecution. Refugees have already been determined to have a well-founded fear of persecution abroad. They are brought here and they are vetted, and sometimes it takes years to come here. They are brought here as refugees, and after a year after arriving in the U.S., they can apply for residence. President Trump has issued an order that all refugee admissions, all those who were admitted as refugees, be taken into custody and put in internment or detention facilities if they haven't applied for residence within 1 year. So now he's gone after these well-vetted people who have already demonstrated that they have suffered persecution. Then there are those who entered without inspection. Those are people who crossed the border illegally. Those people he has deemed are worthy of mandatory detention, including their families being detained. So we have seen people detained who have stage 4 cancer, who need psychotropic medicine, who need insulin, who have young children, who have pets at home, who are the sole providers of their family. We have seen autistic children taken into custody, children as young as 2 taken into custody. And I'm telling you, they are held in the most horrendous conditions that I hate to compare it to the Holocaust, to concentration camps, but if you saw pictures, they look like modern concentration camps. They're sleeping head to toe on floors, no bedding, mylar blankets. They're given no clean water. They have access to maggot infested food. The light is kept on 24 hours a day, one toilet for 50 people in the middle of a room. People are having bowel obstructions because they're embarrassed to go. There's no sanitary napkins. There's no toilet paper. Some of
Patty,
the,
I'm just,
yeah,
yeah, so, um, things are really horrific. And, whether you come over here undocumented, whether you come, as a refugee or asylee, I'm going to actually ask, Ron, the next question, which ties into what you've been talking about, and actually, Rebecca, you could chime in here as well. What are some of the specific Jewish values that you would like to see inform United States public policy when it comes to immigration, because what I'm hearing from Tammy, this goes directly against every one of our values, our commandments, our religious faith, what we hear from our rabbis. But if you, Ron, or you, Rebecca, could talk about what you would like to see in our Jewish values informed in immigration, that would be great as well. Ron, and then Rebecca.
So, let's talk about what we view, what I think most of us would agree we view as our core values. Um, the dignity of the human being. Every person is made in God's image. All right. Our immigration policy traditionally has been consistent with that. Right now, think of some of the words that have been used by this administration to describe immigrants. Garbage, people from shithole countries, um, people who eat pets. I mean, we've all seen this kind of stuff. They're treated as subhuman people. And it's critical we get back to our tradition of treating all people in the United States as people deserving of basic human rights and human dignity. Um, Secondly, the Jewish value of love your neighbor as yourself. We have always, as Jewish people, it's inbred in us to be welcoming to the stranger. Um, our immigration policy is now known worldwide as being very unwelcoming to everyone. We've really, in this administration, and this goes back to your first question a little bit, we've lumped together the concepts of illegal immigration and immigration. And basically, it's the administration is opposed to illegal immigration and is opposed to legal immigration. In over 40 years of practicing, I have never seen. I recently attended a webinar where three former government officials said, "We left the government because we are being forced to deny approvable cases of legal immigrants." Shocking, but maybe not so shocking. Um, a value of family. Tammy talked about this so eloquently. A core Jewish value is the value of the family unit. We see over and over again family, they go to school, they take away children, they rip kids from mother's arms. It's a statistical issue now. Stephen Miller has a statistic that he wants met each day on the number of people to be deported. It has nothing to do with rapists and criminals. It has to do with getting rid of people, even if they happen to be US citizens. Well, that's collateral damage. Um, so let me leave some room for Rebecca, but that's some of my thoughts on core Jewish values being violated.
Rebecca, if you could speak to that, what those core Jewish values are and how Highest views this as a legacy Jewish organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Jewish values that Ron is talking about, because those really are the core ones, these are not just Jewish values, right? They have Jewish words associated with them and Hebrew words associated with them, but these are universal values. They should be universal values. These are humanitarian values. These are what comes when you see each person as being a person, as being deserving of home, of safety, of opportunity, of fairness, basic dignity. But instead, I think that what we see is that, not just since January 20th last year, but since, the campaign, since far before, we see politicians and media talking about immigrants as non-humans. We see the use of, like, for example, insect metaphors, like that there's an infestation of people. We see the use of water metaphors, that there's a surge or a flood of people at the border. These are dehumanizing ways to talk about people. You're literally not using terms that are used for humans, or using terms that are used for water, for insects. And I think that in a way, when you see people as non-human, it makes it easier to go ahead and to try to basically eradicate them from the country and to try to, find ways to arrest, deport, detain, and and I think that's what we are basically seeing. In terms of how Hyas, I mean, that is how Hyas sees it. We are working in this moment to make sure that our clients are not facing not facing this time alone. And that we are standing with them and that we are, supporting them as much as we can along the way, in as many ways as we possibly can. And we're working through the night for every single one of our clients. And I think that this is like to us what it means to be Jewish and to kind of uphold a value of seeing each person as having that inherent dignity.
Thank you. I want to go back to what Tammy was talking about in terms of the inhumane conditions in these detention centers. We've heard there's no food with worms, water, bed, so on and so forth. Um, no medical care. How do you view comparisons between these detention centers, more of which theoretically are going to be built, and historical injustices like the Japanese internment camps or the concentration camps, because those comparisons are being made? Tammy, what do you think?
I mean, I I hesitate to compare anything to the concentration camps where my family perished. Um, I'm very hesitant to do that because they kind of hit at least Jews in a kind of sacred place. But let me tell you, if you saw the photos, if you were there, if you saw what was going on, you would vomit. It is so shocking. It is so disgusting. I live near Alligator Alcatraz in Miami, not that close, but the conditions there, people, the guards can't even make it from their car to inside the facility because of the infestation of mosquitoes. They keep lights on 24 hours a day, and human beings are housed in large cages. They're often sleeping on the floor. They don't get bedding, but they do get mylar type blankets. They are not given any soap. They are allowed to shower at best, usually once a week. Um, they don't get a phone call when they're arrested. They can't even tell anyone often they're arrested unless they can quickly message something on a cell phone. I tell my clients to give somebody a power of attorney over their children in advance, to give somebody a power of attorney over a pet, to have a code word that they can text a friend or a neighbor, because that may be the only thing that they can do to say, I've been taken into custody, like the number 7 or something, which is a code to let them know you cannot find these people. They go missing. ICE does have a locator system, but it takes sometimes days or weeks to to find somebody in it because they don't enter people into it. And because of Stephen Miller's quota of 3,000 a day, US citizens who are often Latin or dark skinned get often swept up into this net and taken into these facilities. And then when they are released, they're released often in the middle of the night in a different state without a phone that works. Um, and
Yeah,
so,
I've heard they've often been released even without clothing or
oh
ability
yeah,
to transport. Um,
This
what
is
what do
what
you think,
Tammy
Ron and
described.
Rebecca? Go ahead. Go ahead, Ron.
What Tammy described is absolutely unacceptable for a hardened criminal. Oh, well over 80% of these people we're talking about are not criminals at all. Their
Mhm.
only violation is that maybe they stayed too long on a visa. Many of them are married to US citizens. Many of them have US citizen children. So even if you're saying to yourself, well, criminals should be treated that way, and I certainly don't believe that, these people are not criminals, and it's abhorrent what's happening, and there's no precedent for it in US immigration history.
I worked at the Chrome Detention Center for a while when I was ICE counsel. Now I'm going back to the 1980s. And I'm telling you, they gave, they purposefully had Haitian chefs to prepare Haitian style meals that I would eat. They were so good. They had a gym with 2 life cycles that I would use to work out. Their gym was so nice. These people, they don't get to see the light of day. usually. The facilities are either no air or they are freezing these people out. It's freezing in there. They have babies and children sleeping head to toe. I mean, imagine I have five grandchildren who are age 6 and under. I cannot imagine how they would react if they saw their parents being pulled away in front of them or pulled out of a window of a car. They're throwing tear gas into vehicles. A newborn was hospitalized in ICU because it impaired her breathing. They took a blind person, they dropped him out on the street miles from his home in the middle of nowhere. He died of exposure after they released him.
I
Um,
read I read about that. He was a refugee from a war-torn country, I think Indonesia maybe, or somewhere, I'm not sure. But I do have a
He
question.
was Rohingya.
Okay. You raised the question of ICE. So I have a couple questions I want to speak to that issue. There have been allegations that ICE is violating constitutional rights, the Fourth Amendment, the Tenth Amendment, failure to abide by court orders, warrantless searches, um, saying that the administration's position that ICE lawyers are not subject to ethical rules. Why, as American Jews, should we care about the rule of law as it pertains to immigrants? And then what have you seen in terms of these legal abuses? Ron, why don't you go?
Well, I mean, we have to be concerned about this because first of all, I think in my upbringing as a Jew, we've always been concerned about social justice, following the law, human rights, and these are clear violations of all laws and rights. We see over and over again that this administration is not even following court orders. There's multiple examples of court orders saying the government has violated the law, and they have, they continue to do that. We see warrantless inspections going door to door, house to house, which is clearly illegal. We see picking up U.S. citizens, and they get detained. In most cases, they end up getting released. But we're seeing this over and over, and for the same reasons I mentioned before, we as Jews, for all the reasons I stated, it should strike at our core in saying this is just not acceptable in my country.
Now,
Now, I'm sorry, somebody asked a question about how many US citizens have been deported. We know that almost 300 have been taken into custody. We don't know how many have been deported because they don't publicize those statistics. But we know that many foreign nationals have been deported in violation of court orders.
the Department of Homeland Security currently is not being funded because the Democrats want to see some changes,
Not
such
true.
as wearing name tags, not masking,
Right.
recording, better training. They cut the training time tremendously. Um, I'll start with you, Rebecca. What would you like to see in this DHS funding bill? I know right now there's long lines at TSA and things like that because of this failure to fund, but the Democrats understand we need to protect
Mhm.
immigrants from an out of control ICE. So what would you like to see in this DHS funding bill?
Um, I might not answer this directly, but just to say, first of all, DHS is not currently being funded. However, this has no
Mhm.
implication whatsoever for ICE's ability to operate because they have so much money from what they were given by Congress last year that it is it's not like, when we see a government shutdown and that means that government departments can't do certain types of work, like the ICE is not in that position right now. ICE is full steam ahead, regardless of the DHS shutdown. HIAS has come out very strongly against any new funding for ICE. So we were opposed to that DHS funding bill going forward with any new funding for ICE. So that is basically the line. But I will say that the small measures that you're naming are so important in terms of accountability for these ICE officers. But it doesn't even scratch the surface of some of the problems that Tammy is laying out. It doesn't, they are very small, corrections to the situation that we're seeing in terms of ICE officers. It is not nearly enough. And so, there's a limit to how much, unfortunately, ability that Democrats in Congress have right now to kind of be the people that enact these changes, but it barely scratches the surface
Tammy, could you
of kind of
speak to
the
that?
bigger
Could
problems.
you speak to this as well, please?
Yeah, I mean, please don't mistake the problems at TSA or the threatened end of or the problems at TSA or the threatened end of global entry, et cetera, as problems because the Democrats are not signing off on the DHS funding bill. That's a bunch of bull crap. It really is. And so don't buy into that. They are purposefully causing a strain on the traveling public to get people to demand their congressmen to sign off on the funding without making changes to the way ICE conducts business. And by the way, the changes proposed by the Democrats don't even hit the surface. There are things like requiring warrants, putting body cameras on ICE officers as all law enforcement officers use. Um, they're just human decency and some due process steps. They are not addressing the termination of all the good immigration judges, the termination of the whole appellate body of the appellate body of judges who were balanced and favorable, the hiring of 600 temporary immigration judges who have no immigration experience out of the military in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, so that they can control the grants of asylum and the grants of relief. They this isn't going to dent the mistreatment. Trump has paused immigration on over 75 countries. That even means legal immigration. Many of these individuals can't get visas. Their spouses and children and parents cannot immigrate to the United States from countries including Colombia, Nicaragua, the Bahamas, Morocco, Brazil. I mean, these are countries with mainstream, and why? He says these people become a public charge. But somebody needs to explain to me how somebody buying one of Trump's gold cards is going to be a public charge, because those are lumped in. This is just, we don't want these people from these 75 countries. There are roughly 193 countries in the world. So 75 countries is over a third of the world that's barred from immigrating to the United States. And that ought to concern us as Jews. Really, this is absolutely preposterous. You don't think there are Jewish families still living in Morocco or Venezuela or Colombia? There sure are, or Brazil. I've handled
Iran.
many of their cases.
When
Many.
when the Democrats take control of Congress, I think that the macro issue is that they should. There was a mandate. I think Trump has a mandate, and that mandate was to go after the bad guys, go after the criminals who are illegally in the country. And I think that funding should be premised on at least targeting or focusing priorities on what he got elected to do, which is get rid of the bad guys. And also, funding should be restricted where it can't be used for raids on churches. It can't be used for
Girls.
raids on schools. It can't be used for taking children away from parents. Whether you call these Jewish values or human values, that's what I would hope that my representatives in Congress would focus on.
And I would go even further, and this is where I fault the Biden administration. The Biden administration took too long to correct a lot of what the prior Trump administration had done. And they took so long that nothing really happened, during the Biden administration. And now let's assume that in 3 years we get a Democratic president. Let's pray that we do. And that I think whoever becomes our next president needs an agenda from day one to undo everything this administration has done. Every proclamation, Trump has not done anything through Congress. He's done it all by executive order or proclamation. To day one, cancel every single one of Trump's proclamations. You know, my son's business is in the Middle East. None of his friends can get out of the Middle East right now because the State Department is gutted. There are very few people working in the State Department, so they haven't even been able to field the calls of all the U.S. citizens stranded in the Middle East right now.
I,
We
I've,
need
I've,
to.
I've been hearing that people they were told to take buses and that they were on their own. But I want to bring up,
But
Ron brought up and you brought up some of these electoral implications. You know, our organization is working to elect Democrats. There are 4 seats that we can flip in PA, and if we can flip them, we can take back Congress, PA alone. But Republicans have been really successful in recent election cycles as portraying Democrats as weak on the border. You know, they say Democrats are weak on immigration. They're allowing, millions of people to come across the border. What are the most effective arguments Democratic candidates can advance to counter the attack that Democrats are quote unquote weak on immigration?
let
Rebecca,
me
and then Ron, and then Tammy. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So I'm going to firstly say a necessary disclaimer, which is that I am from where I'm from nonpartisan organization, right? But so let's just to get that out there since this is being recorded. But let me say what I wish they would do, which is that I wish they would actually have a a true bona fide pro-immigration agenda, a pro-immigrant agenda, as opposed to trying to my criticism. I mean, Tammy has her criticism of the Biden administration. My criticism is that they were trying to prove themselves to be strong on immigration. They put the asylum ban back in place. They strengthened it over what the first Trump administration had. And they if you're going to try to prove yourself to be stronger, that's I think a losing argument. I think that the right thing to do is to actually come out and to make a case that immigration and is good for America, is good for this country's economy, is good for this country's communities, and that you support the immigrants in your districts, that and that you're focused on helping people to come in ways that are fair, and in ways that, protect people's safety, and also in ways that protect the safety of the country, because you can have both things. You can have a process that is, humane and just and fair, and that protects the safety of the country and includes security screenings and vettings, and that can exist. And in fact, that doesn't need to be invented. That's been, invented a million times. What hasn't happened is any political will to get it done. It's been, 40 years since there was any kind of comprehensive immigration reform that passed Congress. All of the systems, the ones that haven't been torn down, are all incredibly outdated. And it is possible to build a system and a structure that works. And that's what they should be working to do, is to actually build an immigration program that works for the country, as opposed to trying to treat it as if immigration is some kind of crisis to solve. It's not. It's normal. People move from place to place for reasons, and you can have a system that matches that need.
If I
Ron, you
were
want to add to
counseling a
that?
Democratic candidate, what I would counsel him to iterate is two main things. Number one is, yes, we do have to have secure borders. That is important. Number two is, immigration is a key principle and key foundation of the success of America in so many different ways that can be easily articulated. And those two themes are not in conflict with each other. And any immigration
Exactly.
bill has to include border security, has to include some answer for the dreamers, some sort of legal status for the dreamers, has to include an increase in the legal immigrant visa numbers to conform with reality. Part of our problem with illegal immigration in this country is that the system is like 40 years old and makes no sense today. Do you have any idea, as a US citizen, if you want to bring your brother or sister to the United States, how long it'll take? I would estimate 30 to 40 years. If you're from if you're one of the best examples is if you can prove to the US government that you're doing something critical to the US national interest and you're from certain countries, it may take 50 years to get you here to do something that the US government says is critical to its national interest. The point is that we have an archaic immigration system, we have to have border security, and we have to update legal immigration. We have to have immigrant quotas that work. We have to have dreamers being taken care of. We have to have temporary worker programs that make sense. It has to be a comprehensive solution.
The other thing is we need laws to deal with those who are here 20 and 30 years and have US citizen children. What happens is it's illegal to employ somebody who is not lawfully in the US and who doesn't have a work permit. So many of these foreign nationals open up their own companies and are actually employing US workers. So when they are arresting and detaining these people and putting their companies out of business, it's often causing the unemployment of US workers. And so we need to address that. And we also, Democrats should look at the impact on Social Security if we have a reasonable legalization program. Our birth rate is not going to sustain Social Security. And the only way, or one of the only ways that we are going to be able to maintain our Social Security benefits in our network is to have a way to make these predominantly young foreign nationals who are not here in lawful status lawful. So not only can they continue to contribute to Social Security, but they can enable us to continue to collect from Social Security. And I think that would be a big selling point to the American public, that this is one good way to shore up Social Security, which we understand is going to be bankrupt in 10 years.
And all of you mentioned, I think, dreamers. We heard a lot about them through successive administrations. What is happening with dreamers now? Are they being arrested and picked up on these raids? I know there was a young girl, I think she was from Babson University,
Yeah.
traveling to visit her parents in Texas. You know, can you please talk about what is the definition? Who is a dreamer? What is happening with dreamers right now? And how should they be included in any immigration reform that we have? Tammy, do you want to start?
Yeah, the Dreamer class is a closed class. It's often called DACA, and that DACA is as for short. But these people, they had to present proof that they were here as of a certain date, that they graduated high school or were in high school, that they were people of good moral character, and they were provided deferred action status and a work permit. Those people now, if encountered by ICE, are being arrested and detained and deported. They're not aggressively going after them, but if they encounter them, say they come to your house and there's a dreamer in the house and they're going to arrest mommy, they're going to take into custody the dreamer. They are not, even though these dreamer kids are applying for extensions of their status and their work cards, I have not seen any granted in this administration. They haven't terminated the status yet. I would not be surprised if they tried to. They tried to in the last administration, and the Supreme Court mercifully held it until the next administration. And then the next administration basically decided not to cancel the dreamer classification. But this administration, eventually it will go away by attrition, because the dreamer status needs to be renewed and the work permits need to be renewed. And if they don't adjudicate these, in the end, everybody will lose dreamer status, and they are arresting and deporting dreamer kids. So they're caught in a quandary too. By the way, I think everyone needs to know that spouses of US citizens are being arrested at their residence interviews. They're being taken into custody, taken to detention facilities. not every spouse. And we're trying to figure out, I was on a conference call today, what makes one spouse arrested without a criminal history and another spouse gets approved. We don't know. But I go into every immigration interview where our US spouse is bringing in a foreign national to adjust them. And I am nervous as heck because I'm waiting. You can kind of tell. The officer asks additional questions. She's constantly emailing on her screen. And, you're beginning to get the feeling that they're going to come in at any moment and take custody of your client. And it's a really disheartening feeling when you know that this person should be made a resident, but they're likely going to be arrested, shipped across the country, shackled, and maybe deported before we even have a chance to do anything about this situation. And even if a federal judge orders that this person be released, chances are immigration is going to ignore. This is the first time in history I've seen that happen because I'm a former assistant U.S. attorney for the government. I would have never disobeyed a court order. No one I worked with would have disobeyed a court order. The U.S. attorney's offices have been gutted because so many people have left, and they left because their their license is compromised. So to address that, Pam Bondi just introduced legislation, or actually a regulation, that would immunize Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice attorneys from ethical violations. So they could no longer be disbarred for ethical violations when Ron and I are subject to the ethical rules. The government wouldn't be. Does that make sense? This is what we're dealing with.
So, to that point, and a point you made earlier about prior administrations, when you look at past administrations, when you look at Obama and you look at Biden, they deported a lot. Obama got extensive criticism for the number of people he was deporting, as did Biden. But they have handled it very differently. You don't see people being ripped out of a green card status meeting. You don't see children being ripped across, the front lawn. Can you talk about, while there were large numbers deported under prior administrations, how it was handled differently between, Obama, Biden, and Trump?
Yeah, two or
Ron, you
three.
want to go with
Oh, I'm
that?
sorry.
Go ahead,
What was
Ron.
that for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so two or three things are important here. Obama was, well, I think they called him the deporter in chief or whatever. Yes, he deported a lot of people, and you didn't have these controversies. Why? Well, number one, there were priorities. It was uh, targeted enforcement efforts. Not looking to take away a child from a parent, targeting people by whether they had done something wrong, what their violations were. Number two is that as a general rule, there was no detention of people other than criminals or people who were serious threats. Now everyone is being detained. Number three, when you were detained, you were generally able to get out on bond. Now that's in many cases impossible. So those would be at least three of the reasons why it really is very different in this administration compared to past ones.
Rebecca, do you see anything different among highest clients?
Listen, our clients are in peril, all of them. They're living in fear. They're traumatized. If they haven't been if they have not themselves been called in for, for an interview, if they have themselves have not been, arrested or subjected to, it's, one of these, arrest, detention, deportation, then they are living in fear. They are like not leaving their homes. They are, worried about stepping outside of their, stepping outside and going to a grocery store or, like I would say this is entirely different. This is entirely unprecedented. And for Hyas's clients who are refugees, because I think that, we're probably most known as a resettlement agency. These are people who were brought here to live permanently. They were given a permanent status. They were screened Prior to even arriving, they were welcomed, they were invited, they were brought here by the US government, flown here. And there was never a question, it was never even a consideration that they could be targeted for some kind of immigration enforcement. So everyone is affected and everyone is scared. And I have to say, if I were someone who was, I want to just like speak to all of you who are listening to us talk on this call, and it's probably overwhelming. It's probably a lot of information, a lot of different examples, a lot of different, terminology that, like immigration is a kind of a complex legal field. And but, for all of you on the call, if you're not an expert in immigration, you don't need to be, right? Like, and we don't need you to be an expert in immigration. What we need you to do is to help see this as we do through the eyes of like a compassionate human being who understands that people should be treated fairly and people shouldn't, families shouldn't be ripped apart and, and what's happening is just beyond the pale. And that's kind of like the starting. If you're there, then you're 90% of the way there. And I think that, we're really you asked about Hyas. Hyas is a very long history where, we've been around since the 1880s. Our organization has lived through some of the worst moments of, Jewish history and was there supporting people. And this is one of the darkest eras of Hyas's history. This is awful,
It is, it
like, and I
truly
don't,
is awful. So, as we're running out of time, what I want to hear from each of you, if you could say it briefly before we conclude, how can we as citizens best engage with immigration in our Jewish communities? Essentially, what can we do? And if you can just each give me maybe a 20-second pitch on what we can do, because people on this Zoom would like to know what they can do after we heard about the horrors that are happening. Ron, Rebecca, and then Tammy.
So I think it's very important that we make it very clear within our communities that this is a priority for the immigration and fair treatment of immigrants is a priority for the Jewish community. And in all of the efforts we make involving the midterm elections and the 2 year later elections, that the Jewish community be outspoken on the fact that immigration is a critical issue in how they vote.
Thank you. Rebecca, what do you think we can do as citizens and as Jewish community members?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that everyone needs to understand that there is a way that you can get involved. No matter how much time you have, no matter how much, like there is a way to plug in right now that would be helpful because honestly, and everything is helpful because we're in such a desperate and difficult moment. What I'm going to do is just put a couple of links in the chat of ways that specifically that Jews and Jewish communities can get involved through HIAS, but the types of things, involve local immigration support. Everyone here can kind of get basic training on, like what the rights of immigrants actually are so that if you see, immigration enforcement actions happening at your workplace or when you're, at the bank or at a grocery store and you see that you can kind of be somebody who can help to help to represent that and help to to weigh into that. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of, help and be involved, but basically, being informed, and looking out for, kind of hyper local opportunities. I will, yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
going to
And
go ahead and drop in some
I will
links.
send an email to everyone who attended and include links of how to get involved. Thank you for putting that in the chat as well. Tammy, very quickly, what would be your 20-second what we can do?
Tomorrow, pick up the phone and call all your congressional and senator representatives and tell them that you support they're not funding the DHS bill without the stringent improvements that we need. toward ICE enforcement. And I would even go further and say you expect them to even go further than what has been proposed.
Thank you. And that is a good note to end on. And I would say to everyone, vote your values. And in Pennsylvania, we have 4 congressional races that we can flip. If you want to get involved in these 4 races and involved with our work at DJOP, where we connect Jewish values to democratic values, please go to djop.org and learn how you can get involved. As all 3 of our wonderful speakers said, we're in a crisis, and it's up to all of us as community members, as Jewish community members, to act. So thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Ron. This was informative and interesting, and we wish everyone a good evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.